Welcome back. It is my pleasure to now introduce our next speaker, Dr. Mark Bayley. He will be speaking on No Patient Left Behind, Optimizing Use of Telehealth Technology to Support Rehabilitation. Dr. Bayley is a clinician scientist at the Kite Research Institute at UHN, Toronto Rehab Institute, and a professor of medicine at the University of Toronto in the Division of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. He is very interested in enhancing rehabilitation outcomes after brain and spinal cord injury and illness. As well, Mark has led multi-center trials of exercise, technology, and medications combined with exercise to enhance outcomes. He's also interested in how to ensure clinicians follow best practices by leading development of clinical practice guidelines, implementation toolkits, websites, and smartphone apps. He currently holds the Coriat Family Chair in Rehabilitation Innovations. Mark has held a number of health system leadership roles, including chair of the Stroke Evaluation Committee at CoreHealth Ontario and the vice chair of the GTA Rehab Network. His work has helped redesign rehabilitation systems in Canada. Welcome to Mark.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Susan, for that kind introduction on this very frigid afternoon. It's very nice to be here and to talk to you a little bit about telerehabilitation. And on this really cold day, I think this is just highlighting why it's important for us to get comfortable with providing rehab in a different way. So with that, I'm going to start our presentation and talk a little bit about our journey with telerehab. You know, we've actually been interested in telerehab for a number of years, even before the pandemic. We had started to provide telerehabilitation for acquired brain injury patients since 2016 because we recognized that some of our patients were actually deteriorating from lack of engagement. We had done some work on remote monitoring, example, facial recognition, and also prediction of falls on our specialized geriatric rehab unit. I'm very interested in the potential of this, but this was all catalyzed on March 11, 2020, when the World Health Organization declared the global COVID pandemic. And I can remember turning to my admin and saying, we need to order a ton of video cameras. And we recognized that there were lots of unknowns and lots of challenges. And our team members started to develop some tools and instructions on how to use the technology so that we could rapidly move to telerehab. And as we've gone along, we spoke to our colleagues and we realized that many of the programs had not started. But anyway, let's get back to the basics of telehealth for a moment, and we'll come back to the story shortly. So just a reminder that telehealth, also known as virtual care, also known as telerehab, is a mode of delivery for healthcare that is convenient and has incredible potential. But I think we'd all like to know and be reassured that it's safe, private, and as effective as in-person care, and that it improves access to healthcare and does not exacerbate health equity and socioeconomic disadvantages. So over the next few minutes, what I'd like to do is to provide you with some information. And by the end, I hope that you'll be able to discuss the various elements of the clinical encounter and some of the existing telehealth and digital health strategies that you might consider using. That you could name some novel applications or technologies that are available right now that could be adapted for telerehab. And then we're going to talk about some barriers and facilitators to implementation of telerehab and some strategies to overcome them, such as we have made available through the Toronto Rehab Telerehab toolkit. So just a reminder, let's go back to the basics again. There are a couple of, most of us think of telerehab as just that video conference or phone conference, but you can do telehealth intervention both synchronously and asynchronously. It can either be healthcare professional delivered or driven, or it could be self-directed or technology assisted. So what do we mean by these concepts? So just a reminder is that synchronous requires the presence of both parties at the same time, and you have an active communication link between them that allows for real-time interaction to take place. And they frequently use video conference technology, whereas asynchronous involves acquiring medical data, then transmitting this data to a doctor or a specialist at a convenient time for an assessment offline. So a more detailed from the University of Miami states that it's in store and forward telehealth data are captured locally, then temporarily stored for transfer later. And I think that the consulting provider then reviews the stored data, makes a diagnosis, treatment, or planning, and feeds it back to the individual. So just remind you that despite our own reticence to move into virtual rehab or to telerehab, that Dr. Google is alive and thriving, that although traditional interactions have the professional and the patient or client at the center, technology actually allows for the embedding of clinical expertise, scientific evidence, and diagnostic approaches in algorithms and artificial intelligence to have a more self-directed approach to their health. So, and it's really estimated that 7% of all Google searches on a daily basis are actually health-related. That amounts to 70,000 searches about health-related topics every minute. So people are already engaged in this actively. So let's break down the core elements of a clinical encounter that we're familiar with. The first element is you have to identify the health issue or the problem. You take a clinical history or a clinical interview. You then examine or assess the person. There may be diagnostics involved, as well as then you go on to treatment. And then we have to assess the outcomes of our treatment. And then we have to promote health maintenance behaviors if our treatment has been successful, or alternatively, if a person needs to continue to practice their rehab. So let's break this down a bit into what can be done by telehealth, what's not so easy to do. So if you think about a clinical history, the interview or assessment is very feasible in a synchronous virtual environment, particularly using video, because you can watch people's nonverbal cues. In the asynchronous environment, you can use questionnaires. They can be either standardized or non-standardized. And the pros of doing so, if you did it in the asynchronous, is it could be quite time-saving in that you can actually have people enter in their measures before you come to your appointment. You can actually have them printed out and ready for you so you can go quickly to the issues where there's problems. The cons are that if you send out a questionnaire or you're doing an asynchronous interview, you haven't really developed a rapport with the person, and it may affect their disclosure of the key issues they're concerned about if they are highly personal. So what about assessment? So let's just sort of go through some of the things that are already available for you. So these are some tools that I downloaded from the internet just to highlight. This is an example on the top left of your screen of tools that integrate some of the monitoring that can be done through cell phones. And it has a monitoring device that can be put on the person's chest to see their respiratory rate and other things. The next over is a stethoscope, which can actually be plugged into a computer and you can listen to it remotely. And it can also be used for diagnosis as well. This is a smart scale, so you can measure people's weight, particularly those with congestive heart failure. This is particularly relevant. Obviously, we also have video apps and video you can examine or have people share a camera picture. And this is a picture of a app that is available, which can actually take a picture of a skin lesion. And in the instance of melanoma, it's actually more accurate than 95% of all dermatologists, because it has artificial intelligence that looks at the features of that skin lesion and through learning, it has developed this accuracy. So you can see that clearly we're getting more and more tools that we can remotely assess people. So if we think about it, there's many remote tools that we can use. The challenging elements for those of us who have to put our hands on people is obviously you can't palpate and you can't really examine people's strength in a perfect way. And doing a sensory examination is not so easy. And there's obviously concerns about balance and safety. So what about diagnostics? Well, already existing stuff that's there. For those of us in the stroke world, many of you will know that some of the jurisdictions already have CT scans that are driving around in ambulances, so people can rapidly diagnose. We know that there are ultrasound wands that can be seamlessly wired to a cell phone, so you can actually do an ultrasound in the field, and this is being used in many, many jurisdictions. We obviously have this incredible amount of emergence of wearable technology, Fitbits, Apple Watches, and of course we have smart devices that we already know can do blood sugars and things like this, and there's also measures that can measure people's coagulation and INR quickly. And similarly, we've recently developed a mask that can diagnose obstructive sleep apnea that you just wear at home, and it has a little recorder in it that will download all the sounds that can then be analyzed to generate a apnea hypopnea index, which is very accurate against a sleep study. So obviously, we have incredible potential for mobile diagnostics, and the cell phone makes this very transmissible. And the problem, though, is that obviously an operator has to be trained to use an ultrasound in the field properly, or at least guided through it. This equipment is incredibly expensive, can be quite expensive. And the other problem is that we need to get that device to the person's home or a remote clinic so we can actually get the data from them. So there's a shipping issue or transmission issue. So what about treatment or rehab? Well, great thing is if we do this in the synchronous environment, we can, the things like education, cognitive intervention, communication, and aphasia treatment are pretty straightforward because they don't involve any physical tasks, and they don't need safety or supervision. Obviously, staff skills in helping people, technical support that people need at the other end of the line may not be the skill set of the therapist or of the provider, and it can also result in information overload. In the asynchronous environment, you can see self-guided apps, and I would just encourage you, if you aren't familiar with this, is to consider going to My Therapy. This is a great website that's been kept up by one of the teams who are part of the National Health System in the UK. And what they do is they've actually rated apps. I'll give you a couple of examples. So this is how they break down the apps into things that are designed for thinking, eating and drinking, pain, memory, communication. And if you click on one of those, what they give you is a selection of apps. And if you say, okay, I'd like to know about an app. Now, here's an example of an app. It's called blah, blah, blah. And this is a speaking app. And what it does, and you can see that the clinician rating of it is a 4.5, and the user rating of it is a 4.6. And 75% of users would review this. So just like you would see on TripAdvisor or other things, or Google reviews, it gives you a review. And then it gives you the description of what it can be used for. It gives you whether it's free or not. And it just can help people measure their output of their speech. So an example of just one of a number of the ratings that they provide at My Therapy. So clearly we have an emergence of these tools that we can all use that could be more self-guided. So then the question comes now is, how do we assess outcomes? One of the problems with the rehabilitation literature is that many outcomes have never been validated for administration by virtual means. And research funding agencies may not actually want to fund these studies. In other words, it's all very nice to validate the 6-minute walk test in a virtual environment, but the problem is that most people would say, oh yeah, if you could get a good video camera on that, you could probably, there's no reason to believe it wouldn't be valid. However, there's many of the outcomes that we do that are self-reported, and obviously they can be quite valid in a telerehab environment or telehealth environment. However, once you get into the more performance-based measures, Then you obviously have to set up the person's home. You need to send test equipment to the person's home. You may have to set up a measurement, such as timed up and go, where you have to have a measurement of a certain number of meters of walking, and that may affect the accuracy of your assessment. So in summary, regarding the telehealth supported encounter, the virtual clinical encounter, from history to treatment delivery to maintenance of health, can be synchronous or asynchronous. And there are many existing technologies that can be used to enhance the quality and safety of the clinical encounter. There are emerging apps that can be an adjunct to an in-person therapy as well that you should know about. So then the things to think about is, given this environment and the frigid environment, I'm assuming that many of you have tried telerehab. And just wanted you to think for a moment if you've used a remote device to monitor or assess your client. For example, have you used an Apple Watch and have them download it to you? Have you had them do something remotely like an oximeter? And if so, which of these devices have you used? And I'd also like you to think about how many of you have actually tried an asynchronous approach. So that's different for many of us, and something probably most of us have not tried as often. So just thinking about that for a moment, we'll start to go on to a section about some of the novel technologies that exist already and could be adapted to us. But first, let's ask, what's the evidence? So there's been a number of systematic reviews, and I do provide the references in the references attached to this presentation. So if you ask the team for the copy, you'll get the references with those. So one of the things, when they've looked at this, I think it's important to note that it's early days and most of the studies have been small, but the conclusion of the Saron paper was that telerehabilitation in physical therapy appears to be comparable with in-person rehab, or better than no rehabilitation at all. And this is particularly true for a number of conditions in which it's already being evaluated. And one of the interesting findings of another review by Appleby et al. From Australia was that while generally positive effects in stroke rehab, an interesting finding in this systematic review was the lack of impact on telerehab on balance. We're actually studying that in another study that's funded by CIHR to see if we can develop better treatment for balance. However, it's not surprising to most of us who are in the area, because balance is hard to challenge safely in an environment that is not with the right equipment. In occupational therapy, this review from Hung et al. Found that telerehabilitation offers an alternative service delivery model, not only bridging distance, but also offering user-friendly treatment. And further research is really needed. And similarly, in this review of aphasia research by Cacciante et al., they found that there were comparable results with respect to face-to-face speech intervention with respect to auditory comprehension, naming accuracy, their aphasia quotient, generalization to conversation, and functional communication. The evidence was still small and insufficient to guide clinical decision-making. However, the results suggest that telerehab for aphasia seems to be as effective as conventional face-to-face treatment. What about cognitive things? And this review from Betts found that there's consistent evidence to indicate that telerehab may be equally effective as other forms of care in the delivery of cognitive and psychological interventions. So again, this is very similar to what we would expect, although many of us are worried. The research is very much pointing to a comparable effect for most people. So what about safety? I think most of us are really concerned about safety, and we just actually started a systematic review on safety with our librarian, and these are a couple of the papers that we found. One was on home-based cardiac rehab, and in this review of the literature, Stefanakis et al. Found that the rate of severe adverse events in a sample of 808 was estimated to be 1 per every 23,000 hours of exercise. That's a large number of hours of exercise. This is a very small number. And then we looked at the stroke rehab literature, and this was from a paper from Ramage et al. From an Australian group that looked at interventions supervised by a telehealth. For this is in the stroke population, and they found 7 studies, small number, only 179 across those studies, but they found no adverse events. And when they looked at the strategies that these studies used, they found that some of them were using caregiver assistance, they were using in-person exercise prescription, and some were using physiological monitoring. So then let's think about, so the evidence is suggesting now that probably equivalent to in-person for everything but maybe balance and some more challenging physical activities. So then how might we evolve this, and how might we actually get further along? And we know that healthcare is notoriously slow to adopt information technology. So here are some things that already exist. And this is a bot. I know that my kids, who are now old enough to apply for jobs, were interviewed by some of these bots. And I'm going to show you what they look like in a second. But basically what it does is it's a standardized interview using artificial intelligence. It can evaluate the expressions of the interview and provide things. And let's just watch the video, and we'll go from there.
Interview process and shortening time to recruit. Hello to Gecko, the video interview bot powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning. Gecko lets you leverage video intelligence to gain deep candidate insights, speeding up the interview process and shortening time to recruit. You can set up specific interviews with custom interview questions. Candidates can then use the multi-platform mobile app to record interviews remotely and on their own time. The artificial intelligence engine then analyzes interview responses and candidate sentiments. You can go through them at your convenience, check out their sentiment ratings, see their responses, and even compare answers to the same question from multiple candidates. Or let the automated leaderboard do the initial sorting for you. Share with your managers for a truly collaborative workflow. And fill positions with the best candidates, selected with a combination of human intuition and hard data. You have positions to fill and resumes to go through. Infuse the interview process with the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and get to the best candidates faster than your competition.
Okay, so that's a great example of something that could be adopted tomorrow, probably for all of us. It could probably put in our own questions, interview people, get some initial reading. And one of the things I'd like to do over the next year or so is to see if we can work on that at Toronto Rehab, because it really seems like this is very helpful for those very complex individuals, and it'll help us to shorten our time in the face of incredible shortages of healthcare professionals. So here's another idea that's come out already. There's discussion about using time zones to provide 24/7 service. So the UK and the New Zealand are talking about whether they'd have a stroke service or an emergency service where they could serve people all over the world, so that when a person is having a stroke and they're wondering, they're in one of the stroke sites, Could we see if they're actually eligible for endovascular therapy? Can we serve that person? We just get a doctor somewhere else to review it so people can be available. Obviously, this requires some licensing, but it is incredibly, it has an incredible potential. We are also doing some work. This is one of my colleagues, Dr. Shiroz Khan, who is interested in using movement analysis. And many of you will know that there's already a number of existing programs for movement analysis where it applies, it looks at the movement, it looks at the swing, and you can see it maps onto the movement and avatar. And what Shiroz has been doing is he's been building up a variety of different video archives to just be able to analyze people, particularly in MSK and stroke, to look at if people are performing the exercise. It gives you a map onto an avatar. And we believe that over the future, we could really use this to automate the feedback to people. So one of the things that this actually allows us to do is that potentially we could use artificial intelligence to actually integrate multiple sources of information. For example, if you're the therapist watching a patient who's exercising, you could see their heart rate. You could theoretically be looking at their movement. And the idea is the artificial intelligence could, it's a lot of sources of information at once. And for you to be able to integrate that, even imagine in a group format, if you had the AI sort of convert into, say, a traffic light system that will go back to you saying the patient is doing it right, and another traffic light system that goes back to the patient and says you're doing it right. And then if not, you get a red signal. So maybe their heart rate is too high and you can give them feedback in real time based on that integration. And so this is what I think the future may hold for us, is this, it doesn't get away from the fact that we still need a therapist as the brains behind the prescription, but the feedback can be monitored in real time. And this might also allow us to do treatment in the chronic phase. Many of us know that after the first 3-4 months after a stroke, there really is not much for the folks in the community. We know that there are some community programs that are telehealth from March of Dimes and other programs, but in this way, we could give them a clear exercise prescription. You could provide them with a curated list of video exercises. You can use the artificial intelligence robot for simple adjustments to the program, and then maybe the therapist could look at the recording and say, you're doing this right, and in their next meeting, adjust the prescription. So clearly, we have an opportunity to do this. And another thing that I think many of us forget about is there's existing evidence for peer support as a motivation. And I think it's important to not forget the role of peers. And we know that there are online communities. And this is an example of Strava, which many of you may know is an app for recording your exercise. And this is my colleague, Peter Bragg, who lives in Australia. And on a daily basis, I can actually see what Peter's doing. I can give him kudos and say, great work. I can comment. And that kind of role of a peer community, I don't think we've yet adopted on in the rehab environment. So I apologize if the sound you're getting, somebody's landing at Sick Kids with the helicopter. So my third objective today was to spend a little bit of time expressing some of the barriers and facilitators and showing you a little bit of what we tried to do and what we've learned as we pulled all together some of these resources. So we have to remember that in order to do most of these telerehab, we have to have access to digital resources and we know that use of digital resources has to be driven by somebody who knows how to use them, and they have to be seeking out their health. They have to have some digital health literacy. And then they also have to believe that there's a potential for digital health to actually be helpful. And this may also be affected by cultural norms and the integration of the digital resources in the community health infrastructure. And this is from a study that was done in 2020. And what they found was lower rates of telemedicine use was associated with older age. This is not surprising to us. In this study, Asian race as well as non-English speaking. So clearly people who do not speak English were disadvantaged by video or telerehab. And particularly when they looked at video use, in this case, in the United States, they saw that lower household income, being Black or Latinx or female, was associated with lower use of video. So this is sort of the background or the backdrop to the challenges we all face. So we in March 2020, we said, okay, can you recover from this pandemic and start virtual rehab in 3 weeks? And in 3 weeks, we tried to pull off a full rollout by a number of our therapists. So what do? We formed a virtual working group almost immediately. We met with our teams. We explored the resources that we had. We initiated planning for equipment. We had to quickly transform what we'd learned into practice. We had developed processes and forms. We developed and provided training to our staff. We set up some online resources, and we developed some patient handouts and set up equipment. By the beginning of our 4th week, we were able to roll out, and we then, from there, did real-time learning. Every 2 weeks, we would send out surveys to both providers as well as to the patients to find out how we were doing. So what was fascinating for us is, despite what you might think, 51% of our patients told us that they had no challenges using the technology. When they did have problems, there were problems with technology, equipment and space, and the ability to participate either physically or communicate. But only 3% complained of feeling safe. Interestingly, our biggest surprises were the majority of our patients felt confident to participate, 87%, and the majority actually felt that virtual rehab was meeting their goals. What we found when we looked at it was the barriers included the bandwidth, the lack of connection to the providers, the physical connection. People needed some guidelines, and some people didn't have equipment that they had in their home that they could use for the telerehab session. When we asked the providers, they were a bit more negative about this experience than our patients were. They told us that there were poor and unstable connections at times. They had to prepare. They felt that they had to prepare extra in order to prepare for a session, and they got fatigued from this. And they also said that if a person had a caregiver, it would be very helpful. So we had a mixed response as to whether the rehab needs were being met according to the providers. They felt that there was a decreased ability to conduct assessments, provide hands-on care, and really challenge the patient, particularly in balance and outdoor mobility. And they recognized the benefits of a hybrid model. So that led to our first edition of our toolkit, because we realized when we looked around that many individuals were actually not doing what we were doing. Some people had been redeployed. Some programs had actually shut down their outpatient areas completely. And so we felt that it was really important for the long-term recovery of people with stroke and brain injury that we really should help these. So we provided this toolkit that initially had sections on getting started, preparing people for telerehab, how you actually implement it, and then how you actually monitor. So what's in it? There's suggestions about how to form a team, understanding the gap analysis between your current and the gap between the best practices. And then we gave a checklist on how to support clinicians. Then we also had a section on consent, setting goals and expectations, how to determine if a person is appropriate, and preparing for your family or friend. And furthermore, we had this handout for patients that they could we send to them or email to them or mail to them, as the case may be. And we also had a checklist of things they could prepare. Then we also had some suggested handoffs, a template for how to schedule one. We also developed a medical event protocol, which would allow the therapist to record when something happened that was concerning. And we also had a safety checklist which was pre-therapy that would help you to be prepared for your session. These are all available to you still, as I'll highlight as we go through. And then we suggested some outcome measures and some ideas for measures they might want to use. We actually created a survey, and we shared with everybody what was in our survey that we used for this presentation, for this rollout. And then we had experience surveys that we used. So then we asked, okay, so where did the toolkit go? Well, it actually went to 47 different locations in 17 countries, and it's gone even further. Then we surveyed the users to find out what was good about it, and we sent out a survey to them between December and July of 2021. And what we heard from them was, when we heard from them, we did some interviews with some of them to ask more structured interviews about the questions, about the toolkit. So what was interesting is that most people found it helpful for preparing for their sessions, improving the knowledge and confidence, that it helped provide safe and effective telerehab, that it offered a QI framework, and addressing the barriers. And from our interviews, it really highlighted once again the importance of infrastructure, equipment, and space. And what we heard in spades was that if the leaders of the organization were not supportive, they were not likely to move forward. So it's really critical for those of you who are in leadership positions or manager positions that the support for this requires awareness on the part of leaders. And then they gave us recommendations, which led to us developing our second version of the toolkit, which focused on preparing better, some key components of the virtual assessment, and then some clinical ideas and gems. And so I'm going to now spend a few moments just going through some of the implementation tips that you will find. So this is some of the suggestions that we have for enhancing digital health equity. We know that where many of you live, some of the people will not have bandwidth. We know that some of them will not have the equipment. And so what we're suggesting for that is that we should all get our heads around donations, asking for donations or loans of equipment. We believe that maybe some individuals should have a wireless enabled iPad or tablet computer, so they can use it using cell phone connections as opposed to having to have their own internet. It may require that there's an outreach team to help people set them up for the first. Obviously, access to privacy. I mean, this is obviously an issue for some people. They can't get away from their family. They're going to have a sensitive discussion. This is a critical thing we need to think about. Obviously, orientation and tech support is needed on an ongoing basis. You may need an interpreter to make a three-way call, and you may have to consider how to involve more people with lived experience. So then we provide a number of guidance regarding assessment. Many of these things are in the toolkit. I won't repeat them, but really, it says that you should be taking into considerations the person's goals, their preferences, the risk and benefits based on the patient profile, and their familiarity with technology. And you should really prepare for the session. And then we go into informed consent. And I'll show you where you can. There's a great video, a good video on this that we prepared, and just to ensure that you get certain information, such as a first responder. For example, if the person's doing therapy alone, do you have a local non-emergency phone number from somebody who could, like a family contact, or do you know the contact for their physician or relevant healthcare professional? A lot of people asked us to sort of provide some guidance on whether you should do telerehab in person versus hybrid. So we did do a video on this, but I'll walk you through it because I don't have time to show you the whole video on it. But basically, if you walk through this algorithm, which was courtesy of some work we did with the Heart and Stroke, and my wife actually was working on this with them as well. And we actually sketched this out on a wall in our house. And basically, it starts with what's the nature of the intervention. If it's more physical activity, you have to, if you go down the left-hand side, it asks, is a caregiver available? If they are, And if they're able to support, then obviously you can move to a virtual model of care. If they're not available, you have to ask yourself, are there safety concerns and requirements for an in-person assessment only? And that might lead you to getting to know the person better with a hybrid model where you in-person first and then virtual later. Or maybe if there's no safety concerns, then you can go to a virtual. If there's a lot of safety concerns, obviously you're going to have to stick with face-to-face. Similarly, most non-physical things, they may need still assistance for telerehab. And if a caregiver is available, obviously can move quite quickly to a virtual model of care. If not, you've got to teach the person how to use the tablet, which will require a hybrid model. So this is just from some of the guidelines we've worked on. INCOG is an example of in traumatic brain injury. I know you guys are in the stroke, but some of the things that make a person appropriate for cognitive rehab or aphasia rehab, if they are going to be done in a virtual environment, is if the person has a history of following instructions well, they have ability to be self-monitoring and self-aware, and ideally family support is available. So I want to make sure that you're available, you're aware of this. You can go to YouTube, Toronto Rehab Telerehab Toolkit. You could just do Kite Telerehab Toolkit, as well, and you'll get linked to our toolkit. You can download it by leaving your email. We'll send a copy to you right away. But we offer a bunch of videos that cover cognitive rehab, how you're remote monitoring and some of the techniques. How do you assess ADLs and IADLs, swallowing, speech, balance and mobility, and then also how you might keep people safe. There's a video of me describing what I just explained to you about hybrid, and then there's also a nice video on consent and privacy. And the last two are videos that I would really strongly encourage you to consider using because they're readily available. You can send the link to your patients. And I'm going to try and see if I can just show you a little bit of that right now, just to kind of give you a sense of what's available. We invested some funds in this just to kind of make it readily available so that we could send the link to people. And I will...
If you are going to be moving around your environment, here are some tips to help get you and your space telerehab ready. The first step is to get yourself ready. Choose clothes that are loose and allow you to move comfortably. Choose footwear that give your feet and ankles lots of support and good grip. Wear any ankle splints or orthotics that you would normally wear when standing or walking. Before the start of your session, make sure you have all of the equipment that you need. This might include a water bottle, pen and paper, and any exercise equipment. Make sure that the device you are using is charged and ready to go. This is also a good time to prepare any questions you might have for your therapist, or any homework from a previous therapy session. If you use a wheelchair or walking aid, ensure that they are close by and that the brakes are on. Next, let's get your environment ready. If you can, choose a quiet and private space that is free of noise and distraction. If you have pets, they should be in a different room. Choose a space that is well lit, but avoid having a window behind you to prevent backlighting. Declutter your space. Move any obstacles or tripping hazards out of the way. Ideally, the floor should be a firm, stable surface, such as a hardwood floor and free of any area rugs. When performing exercises in standing, it is important that you have access to a secure surface in case you become unsteady and quickly need support. There are a number of ways to do this, and you should talk to your therapist about the best option for you based on your balance abilities and the activities that are planned. Here are some possibilities. Exercise close to a secure surface such as the railing at the bottom of your stairs. If you position a chair on one or both sides, it can be used for support, but only if the chair is sturdy and won't tip over if you grab it. Alternatively, you may want to use a kitchen counter or sturdy dining table, which offers the added bonus of support as you move from side to side or in different directions.
So that gives you a sense of some of the things that are in the toolkit and are readily available to you. And we would really love it if you would use them, because my colleagues who spent a great deal of time making these videos really were hoping that they would be well used. So I hope I've provided you with an overview of some of the options we have. In conclusion, telehealth as a mode of delivery for healthcare has enormous potential, but likely at any point, we're probably going to have some number of hybrid models. We really need ongoing technology innovation to improve the safety and effectiveness of this, particularly in the areas of remote monitoring, telerehab, and virtual assessment. And it can improve access. And we must ensure that we reduce health inequity by ensuring that those who don't have digital health literacy are able to participate. And we need really for you to take advantage of some of the existing tools, and we hope that our toolkit is helpful for you. So I'd just like to acknowledge this team, Mei-Chi Guo, and Angie and Eileen, all of whom were integral to this and really helped with. Everyone had a different role. Some of them were involved in the evaluation of balance. Others were involved in the survey creation and evaluation. So I really want to say thank you to them. And I will open it up to question by leaving you with some resources that hopefully you can use. Sue, thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark. Really great presentation. I'm going to let people type in some of their questions in the Ask the Question box. Also remind people that there's a little evaluation survey for this session. You can find it in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you just click on it now and take a minute to fill it out while we do a bit of Q&A with Mark. I'll just read out some of the questions for you, Mark. So the first one is, were health information privacy laws a barrier in the development of your telerehab toolkit?
Thanks for that question. We obviously obtained consent from everybody as we participated in as each person participated in their therapy session. We did have obviously some issues in that we can't go back and perhaps look at everybody's chart to find out what was the profile of the person who participated versus the profile of the person who didn't participate as much. However, we were able to get real-time information from those participating, and we usually knew which program they were participating in because they would disclose to us. But yes, in an ideal world, I think it would be awesome if we could sort of say, here's the link between the person with stroke and how good their participation was, but that would require a more robust ethics approval process.
Right, good. Someone else is asking if the telerehab videos in the toolkit are available in French.
We have not translated them to French, not yet. I'm sorry about that. We did think about that, and I will pass that on to our team to see if we can get translation. If anybody would like to connect with us and offer to help us with that, we would be most appreciative because I think as many people as can use it would be, very helpful. I mean, we don't create these resources, if we can't use them. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, it's good. We have a number of communities that have a large French population in the Northeast. And so maybe there's a few people on today that will be in touch to try and help with that translation. Another question, do you at Toronto Rehab loan out tablets or iPads to patients when needed, and how does that work?
So we do have a few tablets that we've purchased and shared with our patients. There is a risk that they will walk away and they are hard to get back. Obviously, we work in a more urban environment, but we do serve people from all over the province for some of our specialized services. Our experience has been generally good that those tablets have returned. You do have to put in place a mechanism for the person to mail them back or courier them back, and that is expensive. We were very lucky in that we specifically asked donors early in the pandemic if they could, when people who previously donated to Toronto Rehab, if they would be willing to donate funds for this cause. And we were very fortunate that a number of people did donate. So we were able to, I don't know the exact number, but it was between 10 and 20 we have that we can use for this purpose.
And did people donate used ones, or did you all purchase all brand new?
I believe we purchased mostly new. I don't think people did used ones, sorry.
Yeah, okay. In terms of, I'm thinking of our rural environments and poor internet access, you talked about that a little bit, and I just wondered if you could expand on it a bit more. I think you were saying if people could use their cell phones as a hotspot rather than having to plug into internet. I don't know if you don't have any experience with things like, I don't even really know what I'm talking about, but like data sticks that you could get from
Yeah,
Rogers or
so,
something? I don't know if you have
yes,
any.
I think there are a variety of options for setting up hotspots. There is the Rogers, whatever it's called, lightning stick or something, and the person could purchase it and plug it into their computer if they have a poor connection. But there are some areas of the province where there's poor cell phone and internet connection. And in this instance, and we've never tried it, but I do know that there's an emergence of satellite internet, you know, and some individuals could theoretically take advantage of that. Obviously, it is expensive. However, it does seem that the sort of rogue that many of us are not sure if we like or not, Elon Musk, has really worked at placing satellites all over the world so that satellite internet could be available to everyone. But I do know that there are other satellite internet providers that I think we all need to get familiar with, because there may be individuals for whom that's the only source of their internet, and they may not have considered it.
Yeah, and you mentioned also maybe gathering someplace in a community. So I think of James Bay and Moose Factory and Moosonee, and you know, I wonder if there's a way that they could be gathered at, you know, attend someplace in their community that would have the capacity.
That was actually what's happened with the Ontario Telehealth Network. They actually, the original OTN was set up that you would go to a site, and I think that infrastructure still exists. Obviously, because of the development of various platforms, we were very platform naive in our toolkit, because we just didn't want people to get hooked on Zoom or Teams or one of the available platform. We really wanted to sort of stay away from choosing. However, the Ontario Telehealth Network does and has had in the past centers you could go to, and they could be used for sure for telehealth and telerehab.
Right. Good point. Just a couple of questions around equipment. When you're talking about Dr. Khan and the movement analysis, how expensive is that equipment?
So what we're working on is actually his goal, and we haven't got there yet, but his goal is to make this cell phone enabled. So you just have to have a cell phone or a tablet camera, and that will be sufficient to feed the artificial intelligence. So that's the end game for that one.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. Thank you. And now just thinking about what's happening in our community and in the development of a new outpatient stroke program, what would you recommend as equipment needed if you're going to incorporate your virtual rehab into a new outpatient program?
So, I mean, it's great. You certainly have to have adequate equipment that you may need. So first of all, let's just go through the encounter a little bit. For some of the therapists, if we know that outpatient program is going to be exclusively virtual because of where the person lives, you obviously need a set of redundant equipment that you may need to send home with a person if they're being discharged from inpatient. So you need some extra equipment. They may not be very complicated, but things like some kind of step ups or weights or other things you might need to send home with them. Some of this stuff is in the telehealth toolkit that we provide. Second thing is, if you're going to be doing an assessment or doing something, you need to have that equipment go home with them as well. So you need redundant assessment kits. If you're going to do a box and block or something, obviously you have to have that. I guess the other thing that we're sort of, and again, some of this stuff is in our toolkit. If you're going to be doing an assessment and demonstrating something for a person, you have to have what you're going to work with on the person with you so you can demonstrate. So being very cognizant about what your session would look like. I need a table, so I show onto a table. I need a railing, so I can show them how they might grab onto a railing. I need a chair, just like in the video. So those kind of things are critical. And then when you go to the video, and some of those equipment, we do provide guidance on that. But you're going to obviously need a high definition video camera with good audio. Many of the therapists will step away from the camera because they need to show an exercise. So there's obviously a need for a good quality microphone from that camera so that people can be heard. There's obviously microphones that you can develop either, with you wearing, iPod, like an AirPod or something, wireless microphone you might need, because if you're going to show something regarding balance, you need to step away from your computer and you need to be unencumbered. So these are kind of technological things. Ideally, I think you need to work with your own IT department. If you're having technical issues or the patient is having technical issues, it's really nice if your help desk is aware that you might need help and you've worked out some agreement that, you know, we have patients who are having trouble connecting with us and can you help them? So that might be a good thing. I know that for us at UHN, we are building in that capacity so that if somebody is having difficulty in a virtual environment, that they can then go to they can click on the link and say, I'm having trouble, and it'll take them to a virtual person who tech support. So that's kind of a quick overview of some of the things. Much of that is in the toolkit, but I do think that you know, most of us will be doing what I would call hybrid. So, you know, I think really kind of framing your thinking around, okay, if this person can only come in once or twice, what are we going to do in that in-person assessment? What am I going to train them? I mean, our temptation would be to start our therapy, but maybe for the cognitively impaired person or a person with aphasia, you might want to spend your session developing mastery on how to use the tablet you're giving them rather than spending time on an actual therapy session. So all of this is very likely we're going to end up in a hybrid environment. However, for people who live far away or with weather conditions being what they are, it is critical for us to accept that we need to maybe see if we can make this work. I don't know if that answers your question, but it sort of gives you a broad sweep of the kind of things people need to think about.
Yeah, thank you. It's very helpful. And I'm looking forward to looking at version 2 of your toolkit. Yeah. That's all the time we have today. So Mark, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and spending an hour with us today. And I'm sure we'll see you again in the near future.
You're very welcome.